Three European nations, which are set to recognize Palestine as a state on Tuesday, have condemned Israel's ongoing attacks on Rafah. The foreign ministers of Ireland, Norway and Spain held a joint presser in Brussels where they spoke about the need for a two-state solution to the conflict, while they also accused Israel of breaching international humanitarian law by refusing to stop its deadly strikes on Rafah.
There can be no military solution to this conflict. And I repute absolutely any group using violence or terrorism to try and eliminate the state of Israel or to eliminate the state of Palestine as an idea or as a reality. They will not succeed. And I condemn the violence of yesterday, the rockets that were struck at Tel Aviv and the heinous attack on the Rafah tent refugee camp last evening, where again innocent children and civilians were killed, again in violation of the International Court of Justice and its instructions to Israel to cease the bombardment of Rafah.
This stresses what we have been calling the three of us, our three countries, for a long time, that it's an immediate ceasefire. But the gravity is even larger because it comes after a decision taken by the International Court of Justice that once again I want to recall that are binding and compulsory for all parties. Therefore, for Israel, that is calling to stop this attack on Rafah. I think that this time we have to raise our voice not only for an immediate ceasefire, but also to back international law and the United Nations Charter.
And Norway's foreign minister urged other European countries to follow suit in recognizing a Palestinian state.
We are in this low point in history when it comes to the Middle East. It is exactly when you need to think about the day after. There's an imperative, which is to get to a ceasefire. There is another imperative, which is to radically upgrade the humanitarian efforts. But neither of these are actually solutions. The solutions have to be political, and we need to think about that political solution now. That is the context in which Spain, Ireland, and Norway chose to recognize. We encourage other countries to do the same. We know that a number of European countries are either on the way to do so or contemplating, and we hope they will follow suit.
Mohammed Al-Masri joins us now. He's a political analyst and professor of media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Sir, thank you so much for joining us again here on the set. Let's start with, basically, I'm very curious to know what you think about the move by what we see now, Spain, Norway, and Ireland in recognizing the Palestinian state. You know, what type of impact will it have on the day-to-day lives of struggling Palestinians, specifically in Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, in the short term, there's not going to be any impact at all. I think, as I said earlier in a previous interview, this kind of small symbolic act can be meaningful over the long term, especially when combined with other diplomatic acts. But what Gazans need right now is something more meaningful, something more substantive. They need calls for, they need the arrest warrants. They need calls for sanctions and an immediate end to this violence. I thought it was interesting when they were talking during the press conference, they were basically adopting all of the U.S. talking points. They were talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, which is part of the reason why we ended up where we ended up. They were talking about the revitalized Palestinian Authority, which is very paradoxical, right? To talk about the Palestinian Authority, which is deeply unpopular with Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank, while at the same time talking about Palestinian self-determination. There's a contradiction in terms there. And then they were also talking about the two-state solution, which is a practical impossibility given the presence of more than 200 Israeli settlements and outposts and more than 700,000 Israeli settlers all over Palestinian land. So Israel has intentionally rendered the two-state solution an impossibility, and then we sit up here and talk about this pie-in-the-sky idea, and it's just not gonna happen. So that is something that I was taken aback by.
But is it a morale boost? Because I mean, this does fit into the Palestinian drive for more and more recognition.
from that standpoint, yes, and that's why I started with, I think over time, this is the kind of thing that can make an impact, right? There's a diplomatic tsunami, to borrow the phrase that was used by a former Israeli diplomat, being hurled upon Israel right now from the ICJ and the ICC, and now you have the Palestinian recognition of a Palestinian state. You had a couple of weeks ago at the UN General Assembly the vote on enhanced observer status. So there's a lot going on right now, and all of that helps the Palestinian cause over the long term. But it's strange, to say the least, to be talking about all of this in the midst of a genocide, right? What Palestinians need is something more impactful, more direct, and more immediate.
Because, especially after witnessing these distressing scenes overnight, it does feel like Gaza is on a precipice right now more than ever. I want to ask you, what do you make of the fact that we have not heard anything from U.S. leadership? No reaction so far. I mean, it is Memorial Day weekend, but still, are you surprised by the lack of reaction?
I'm not surprised at all, just as I was not surprised when the U.S. came out and supported Israel after Friday's ICJ order commanding Israel to stop its Rafah invasion. The reality is that the U.S. is in lockstep with Israel. There's really no resistance there whatsoever. What you had last night was a very practical example of the Dahiya doctrine, which Israel imposes from time to time. That's where it's basically a doctrine of disproportionate force, where they target civilians intentionally, inflict mass destruction in hopes that the civilian population will turn against its leadership. It's a war crime in every sense. It's a violation of the principle of distinction, a violation of the principle of proportionality. And if there was ever a time for the U.S. to speak out, it would be now. But as you said, they were silent.
All right, Mohammed Al-Masri, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.